She said, "Oh, well, isn't that so great that you get to get that out of your system at such a young age?" And I thought, that's not the response I was looking for, Betty. Well, I think we've made figuring out our purpose dramatically harder than it should be. Like, why isn't figuring out our purpose any easier? A lot of times it feels like hieroglyphics or something that you have to interpret or something like that. I really think that purpose is hard to figure out because I think we've been trained to chase after what we think will make us happy. So if you think money and fame and followers, instead of what we believe we've been built to go and do in this life. It's kind of funny that we get so upset when temporary things only bring us temporary happiness. Well, to me, purpose is the only thing that I've ever experienced that brings that lasting happiness because it gives me a foundation every single morning to build my day off of. So I remember when I figured out my purpose personally, I was right in the thick of my Top Fuel stuff. I was working 7 different jobs to make money so I could finish my Top Fuel licensing passes. I was working for another Top Fuel team. I was traveling all over the place. I was so incredibly passionate, though, about what I was doing. I spent the majority of every single waking moment that I had thinking about how to make that dream a reality. And this one time I was sitting on an airplane and a really nice older lady sat down beside me. I was heading out west to go to this event and her name was Betty. I'll never forget Betty. I know what she was wearing that day. I can still hear her voice in my head as she's talking. And she was really excited. She was heading out west to go see her grandkids. She told me all about them, of course. But finally she turned to me and it was that moment where she was about to ask me why I was traveling out west. And I thought to myself, oh, this is it. All of the turmoil I've been through in my life and the effort that I've put in of becoming a professional race car driver. And here I am trying to live this dream out. And I finally get to tell somebody about it, right? And she's going to be so impressed. She's going to want to take a picture with me. She's going to want my autograph. I'm like building it all up in my head. And I finally looked back at her and I said, well, I'm a professional race car driver. I'm heading out for a national drag racing event to drive in. And she looked back at me and she absolutely crushed my soul. She said, "Oh, well, isn't that so great that you get to get that out of your system at such a young age?" And I thought, that's not the response I was looking for, Betty, right? I wanted her to be impressed and she wasn't. But really, you know why it bothered me so bad sitting on that airplane? Because I thought about the rest of the flight, right? But I had a crisis of belief, and I feel like it was the first time when as I was pursuing that dream and going through what I was going through, that I had that crisis of belief where I thought, man, maybe this is just something I got to get out of my system. Is this really my purpose? And so thankfully I had a long enough flight where I got to make that decision because by the end of that flight, I was looking at myself saying, nope, I'm built differently. This is my purpose. And I decided on that flight that I was put on this earth to affect the motorsports industry and to change it for the better. But I reached that decision because it wasn't like I was only passionate about my dream. I was equipping my passion. I sat there and thought about everything it took to go and continue fighting for that dream. I was learning, I was struggling, I was forging my own path. There was no manual for what I was going through and what I was trying to go and do. And I began to take it as a badge of honor. And I am just one of those individuals where I've looked at people that seem to be pursuing their purpose the most effectively. And every single one of them went through that chapter where they weren't afraid to equip themselves in what they were passionate about. And so for some reason, that combination to me, I see more people find their purpose by finding their passion and deciding what they really love about this life. And then they begin to go and equip themselves in being able to accomplish things through that. I'm just a big believer that when I stopped waiting to crack the code of finding my own purpose, I began to go out there and equip that passion, and my purpose almost began to find me. There's a book that has been so influential to me. I would recommend anyone go out there and pick up, but it's called Man's Search for Meaning. A guy named Viktor Frankl wrote it. And it's an amazing book because the first half of the book, he talks about surviving the Holocaust. The second half of the book talks about living life in such a way of all of the psychological things that he learned by going through the Holocaust, of coming out of it and making sure that he was able to get every ounce of life that he could until the day he died. Well, there's a chapter of that book that he talks about how we can identify our meaning of life. And to me, there's a lot of meat on that bone, right? But there's 3 ways. He said, number 1, he said you can create a work or accomplish a deed. And so I started looking at that and thinking, okay, if I think back on what I've accomplished so far in my life, I began to identify unique skill sets and passions that I possessed that enabled me to go get it done. Right? I could look back at my motorsports life and I can think about the things, even today, things that I do now in my career as a professional monster truck driver that I do uniquely different than other people. Secondly, he said you could experience something or encounter someone. There's been a lot of times I've gone to another country, I've gone to a culture, I've met somebody that really impacted me, but it made me realize that I began to draw close to that person. It could be a next door neighbor, or it could be a culture that's completely on the other side of the globe. But I began to see that I had this natural draw to whether it was giving monetarily or just going and serving that culture. And I found meaning through that. Well, the last one though, and I think a lot of people experience this because all of us experience some level of suffering, it seems like, at some point in life, right? But it's the attitude that we take towards unavoidable suffering. Frankl, he writes this sentence, he goes, in some way, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. Right? And so turning that tragedy into triumph is uniquely human. It's something that only you and I do. Our pets and our different animals around the world, they don't have to go through that stuff, but you and I do have to go through it. And for example, I've worked with so many parents out there who have had to watch their child go through pediatric cancer. But now they've become advocates to raise awareness and support other families going through that same situation. Right? They've chosen to find purpose and meaning after their devastation through using that suffering to go and help other people. Well, if we're going to become purpose-driven, we have to become lion-hearted. But here's what I really mean by that. I love lions. I'm kind of secretly sort of obsessed with them. A lion's roar, it's about 114 decibels, roughly as loud as a professional football stadium on game day. That roar can be heard up to 5 miles away. But here's what I love about it. Scientists have no explanation for what makes that lion roar, right? There's no consistent reason that they can find. And I love that there's no physical explanation to it because it means that that lion's heart is what makes it roar. Whatever that lion's passion is in that moment makes it produce this guttural, obnoxiously loud roar that shakes the ground and lets every animal nearby know who the real king of the jungle is. Now, I believe when we equip our passion, you and me, when we become purpose-driven, we end up finding that roar we didn't realize was in our chests. And sometimes we don't need logic to drive us. When we get our teeth kicked in by life, sometimes what I really need to do in that moment is take a deep breath and with every ounce of heart I've got, rattle some windows with the most intense roar I can muster. I just choose to believe that when we stop living like we're an accident, when we recognize that we have a uniqueness that cannot be duplicated, when we accept that we have a purpose in this life, we can finally fight for our dreams with an unapologetic, unrelenting, and uncompromising direction. And that's what real warriors do.